Hello, YouTube. Welcome to the MSO Game Show, the show that proves that game theory's theory on Link's death and Majora's Mask is a load of crap. Alright, before we dissect this theory and tear it apart, I would first like to ask everyone to watch the aforementioned video before watching this one. Here's an annotation right up here on the screen for you, and the link is also in the description. Did you watch it? Well, if you did and your mind was blown, then prepare to get your gray matter put back into your cranium and get blown out again, because I'm about to set the record straight on Majora's Mask and the fate of the young hero Link. First off, I'd like to bring up what game theory said about what he believes Termina is, which he states here.
I propose to you that throughout Majora's Mask, Link is actually in purgatory, the waiting room of the afterlife, and that the game represents his journey to accept his death and move on. First, look at the name of the place, Termina. That's not even subtle, Nintendo. Termina, like terminal, the end.
According to page 111 of the Hyrule Historia, it defines Termina as a strange parallel world where many of the inhabitants look identical to the people of Hyrule. It states practically the same thing in the game's instruction booklet. It seems to me this is more of just one of the many different worlds that Link has plunged himself into. I mean, he's been to Lorule, the Sacred Realm, aka the Dark World, the Twilight Realm, Subrosia, and perhaps others that I may be forgetting about. I'll expand on this after I show you this next clip.
Where did Epona go? You see them run into this tree, and I guess they could just jump from one stump to the next, but does Epona also live through that huge fall? Even if she does, Skull Kid would have to transport her over this water, through this cave door, and over these deadly platforms, all for her to end up at Romani Ranch later in the game. And he'd have to do that all before Link arrives so that he'd be ready to hover there all cool and Magneto-like. It does seem pretty suspicious.
Like it can't be real.
But why? Why can Skull Kid not be real? This one question remains unanswered throughout the entire video, unless I'm not hearing something. Also, Peanut Butter Gamer, when he talks about Epona and how Skull Kid would have had to have transported her to Termina, fails to speculate that perhaps, thanks to Majora's Mask, Skull Kid might have had some kind of teleportation power. He could have just snapped his fingers and made her disappear into Termina Field, where she is eventually picked up by the Gorman brothers. He just doesn't use it in the beginning to teleport himself away from Link, and instead floats away, probably to taunt him. Of course, this is all just conjecture. Actually, on the subject of the Gorman brothers and characters looking like people Link knew in Hyrule, isn't it kind of odd that he sees two farmers that look like the same person? Not only that, but what about Kume and Kotake? Why would Link, who fought these two witches, suddenly imagine them as two nice old ladies and the Gerudo, whom he eventually befriended, as vicious, corrupt pirates? It is because of these holes that I propose that Termina is one of two things. First, it could be the Child Era's version of the Dark World, which is actually plausible because in Four Swords Adventures, which comes after Twilight Princess, a level by the same name, Dark World, has Lost Woods as one of the stages. While it may or may not be the same forest that Link visited in Ocarina of Time, this could be the same forest that Link traveled through during the intro of Majora's Mask. I base this on the fact that the boss of this level is Phantom Ganon, who wields a sword bearing the names of the blacksmiths of Termina. Second, perhaps Termina is just as the Historia says it is, a parallel world. Or maybe Termina is just an alternate dimension that shows a possible outcome for what we know as Hyrule, especially how there was once a monarchy, but it lies in ruins. But I guess that's another theory for another time. Either way, the idea that it's a parallel world isn't too far-fetched when you consider the fact that Skull Kid freely enters and exits this dimension as he pleases, most especially since he comments toward the end of the game that Link smells familiar, and that he reminds him of someone he met before, a clear reference to Link seeing him in the Lost Woods, considering there's at least one side quest where you must interact with one. Humorously enough, it involves selling him a mask. This wouldn't be too unusual, given how Zant from Twilight Princess seems to be able to freely come and go as he pleases, although this is most likely because of Ganondorf giving him the power to do so. Rosa, however, is a good example since she can enter and leave Subrosia as she pleases in Oracle of Seasons. This possibly applies to the Happy Mask Salesman given the kind of powers he's theorized to have, such as pulling a giant organ out of thin air. Actually, on the subject of the Happy Mask Salesman, I would like to bring up something that is stated by Game Theory, who states that the reason the Happy Mask Salesman says, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" is because Link is dead, and he knows it. However, it could very well be that the terrible fate has nothing to do with Link's apparent death, or the fact that he's been turned into a Deku Scrub. Perhaps among the powers that the good merchant is theorized to possess, clairvoyancy is one of them. I propose that the terrible fate refers to Link's death in the future, and decay and death are everywhere in Termina, more so than possibly any other Zelda game, constantly reminding Link that someday he too will meet the inescapable fate of all living beings, known as death. However, recall what the hero Shade says in Twilight Princess.
Although I accepted life as the hero, I could not convey the lessons of that life to those who came after. At last, I have eased my regrets.
The terrible fate is that, despite having gone through the stages of death, Link still had one major regret: not passing down the lessons he learned through his life. This is where my own theory as to what happened to Link after Majora's Mask begins. In order to prove that Link did not die in Majora's Mask, I present to you Exhibits A from page 118 of the Hyrule Historia, and B from Ocarina of Time, as read by Peanut Butter Gamer.
Could it be that he died prematurely? Could it be that he died in the Lost Woods becoming Astolphos? Could it be?
To answer Peanut Butter Gamer's question, no, it cannot be. Exhibit A. Take note of what the Hyrule Historia says about the hero Shade. It clearly says that the Link of Twilight Princess is descended from the hero of time of this era. Now, in order for the Link of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask to be called the ancestor of the Link from Twilight Princess, the Link whom Game Theory and Peanut Butter Gamer think has died prematurely, would have had to have had a family of his own. However, this line of thinking leads to even more questions, which I will get into as soon as we look at Exhibit B. Exhibit B. In order to actually disprove that this Link became Astolphos here, we're going to have to prove that he did not actually die in the forest. Peanut Butter Gamer uses what Fado says in Ocarina of Time as evidence that he died and became Astolphos. However, in Ocarina of Time, Navi makes this statement about Skull Kid. Skull Kid, is this what happens to kids who get lost in the forest? He seems unhappy to have no face. And on page 84 of the Hyrule Historia, it states that adults who get lost in these woods are turned into Stalfos, while children are turned into Skull Kids. This means that Link would have turned into a Skull Kid, if anything. Also, don't forget that large skeletons with armor and swords aren't the only Stalfos you see. Hyrule Field is littered with Stal children. Perhaps what becomes of disobedient Kokiri who leave the forest, given that the Deku Tree warns them that they will die if they do so? Either way, Link, at this point, could not have become the kind of Stalfos he appears as in Twilight Princess.